John is truly known across the globe. Welcome, John. We are thrilled to have you on our campus today.
Over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about a whole number of economic trends, analyze these trends, look at some of the risks that are associated with these trends, take a look at labor, immigration, automation, the impact, trade, globalization with more of a focus on China, and take a look at our capitalist system, which I'm a big fan of, but which may need some rebalancing. Well, there's dozens of trends and a number of critical issues that are putting upward and downward pressure on the economy. You can then take those trends and project them forward, and it gives you a better idea of what's ahead.
John has written several books, and most recently published on September 1st entitled Global America, as well as hundreds of articles. His op-eds have been nationally syndicated and have appeared in the Miami Herald, the Houston Chronicle, the Denver Post, and Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He has also been featured in the Wall Street Journal, and his work has appeared in the New York Times. Please join me in welcoming back John Manzella.
As soon as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me I'll be talking about the forecast, and I was here last year talking about the forecast. And for somebody in my business, that could be a risky venture, especially if I was wrong. But there's good news, and that is memories are designed to fade, and I'm hoping you forgot what I said last year. Just kidding, just kidding. We need to create an environment that encourages entrepreneurs to take risks. Because when they take risks, they start new companies. And when they start new companies, they create more jobs. The skills deficit is the #1 concern on their minds. 10,000 baby boomers reach the age of 65 each day and retire. And the problem is when they retire, they take their skill set with them. But the biggest issue I find here is the U.S. schools have always attracted the world's best and brightest. We educate them, and then we send them home to compete against us. If you can't find the skills you need, companies can't grow. Immigration really has been the lifeblood of the American economy. When population declines, you have fewer consumers, you have fewer producers, your GDP drops, and standards of living will then follow. The thing is, we don't know what the jobs of the future will be, but we do know they will require highly, highly skilled workers. So for the first time in my life, workers now are really in the driver's seat as opposed to the HR department. Friday off. Now, don't get me wrong, millennials are very hard workers, but the culture is very different than, say, my generation. So companies need to adapt to this new generation and offer benefits that are attractive to this generation. But over the years in China, I think many citizens have confused a rising Chinese stock market with a healthy one. And they've also confused an economic system with a sustainable one. In my opinion, the Chinese economic system is not sustainable, and I think the Chinese leadership knows this. But the bottom line is state planning doesn't work. The only legitimacy of the ruling power, the leadership in China, is to create jobs at all costs. When you reform an industry, you typically pull subsidies away. As a result, you typically get higher unemployment. In China, you very often get civil unrest. And what does the Chinese ruling party fear more than absolutely anything? I mean, President Xi is walking a tightrope, which is more like a high wire act. Imports from around the world push inflation down. Now that's coming to an end. Chinese wages have risen 170% in the last decade. They have a tremendous crisis on their hands in terms of demographics, too few people, which I'll get into shortly. So, I could tell you one thing with a great deal of confidence, that we will definitely have higher inflation just for that particular reason in the years to come. Now, when it comes to trade, we all know China hasn't played by the rules. So the question comes down to, how do you change Chinese behavior? Well, how well did we do with the trade war? And I've always argued that the benefits of trade really are not very well understood. I've had members of Congress often pull me aside and say, John, I understand that this piece of legislation is very beneficial, but it's so goddamn complicated. I can't sell that economic reality in my congressional district. GM sells more cars to China than GM sells to US consumers. And the bottom line is globalization is not dead. Globalization is not dying, but globalization is evolving. Question for you. If you're a US company and you want access to 512 million European Union consumers, are you still going to invest in the UK? And the euro, it might be actually way undervalued for Germans that are highly productive and way overvalued for Greece, which has a much lower productivity rate. So I think we have 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. Almost half of all our exports go to those 20 countries. What does that tell you? 40% of that content and that Mexican product was actually US content. It could be your products going down to Mexico, being incorporated in the production, then coming back to the US, so on average 40%. Does that mean we should lop off 40% of the trade deficit? So the deficit. And I remember going from West Berlin to East Berlin in March 1990, like going into a time warp. I went back into 1947. And you saw what happened and how socialism doesn't work. Well, again, I've always been a real fan of free market capitalism. But the key is to balance it, not to let it go too far to the right or too far to the left. Extremely important, and we want to keep that middle class from shrinking. And so you don't have a vote next time around far, far left.